Welcome to this breakaway crochet tutorial. This video goes along with the written pattern for this McLACE shawl, which you can download for free from my Ravelry pattern store. While the written pattern sets out the full step-by-step instructions for this project, in this video I will focus more on specific concepts that might be hard to understand by reading the pattern alone. Aside from visiting my Ravelry pattern store, you may also like to check out my Breakaway Crochet website for more tutorials, as well as the motif library, project ideas, inspiration, and much more. Please see the description for links to all these resources. So let's get the gist of what we will be doing. First of all, this is a mini wheel, and it is the basic element of this project. It is essentially a very small one round motif consisting of 8 single crochets. But if the thought of making hundreds of these mini wheels one at a time sends you into a coma, don't worry. Using my breakaway crochet techniques makes it possible to seamlessly incorporate these mini wheels into the pattern as we go. So, crocheting the shawl will feel more like we're doing a back and forth type of stitch, and not at all like a typical motif project where you have to make each one of these one by one. Let's look now at how the mini wheels are arranged. In general, the mini wheels are separated from one another by chain stitches. By adjusting the number of chains between each one, we get the illusion of this tartan or plaid design. Looking closer, we can see how the mini wheels are arranged in groups of 16 to make a square. So when I talk about a square, I'm referring to a 4 by 4 grid of mini wheels, with each one of the mini wheels separated by 3 chains. And zooming out, we can see that the squares are separated by 6 chains on all sides. And as set out in the pattern, the shawl will end up being 4 squares wide and 13 squares long. But if you would like your shawl to be a different size, it should be easy to see how to make changes once you understand the basic pattern sequence. So let's start working the shawl. To start, we need to work a special setup row that establishes the first 4 squares. When we have 4 squares in a row like this, I'm calling that a set of squares. And we will start here with our first mini wheel, and we work from left to right, which is unusual, but you'll see how it all works out in just a second. So to make a mini wheel, we start with a very important breakaway technique, and it is called a floating single crochet. So to make a floating single crochet, start with yarn over the hook and pinch the yarn close to the hook. Do another yarn over and pinch that new yarn in with what you're already pinching. You kind of have 2 pinched loops there. Do another yarn over and draw through the 2 pinched loops, and here we have the 2 loops that make the floating ring. So this floating ring is what we will be working all our stitches into for this mini wheel. Alright, so let's finish this stitch. We've got to do the single crochet part, so just do yarn over, pull through 2, and this whole thing here is called a floating single crochet. Alright, so let's continue with our mini wheel by putting 7 more single crochets into this floating ring. So now we have the equivalent of 8 single crochets that make up the mini wheel. Let's close the mini wheel with a slip stitch in the next stitch. And there's our first mini wheel. Now let's continue with this setup row with chain 3, and let's make another mini wheel. Remember, that is yarn over, pinch, yarn over, pinch, yarn over, draw through 2 loops, yarn over, draw through 2 loops. And again, let's do 7 more single crochets into this floating ring. And we need to close this mini wheel, but we do it a slightly different way than we did the first one. From now on, when we close a mini wheel, we will be going around the connecting chains. So in this case, you've got a chain 3. So just dip the hook down underneath that chain 3 and do the slip stitch around the chain. So there we go. Continue with another chain 3. Now this time we're going to just start a mini wheel. Now do our floating single crochet, and this time just 1 single crochet into this floating ring. Continue with chain 3. And now the pattern instructions say to slip stitch into the 10th stitch behind the hook. That was the only way I could think of to really be specific about where you go when I write it in words. But as I do this video, I can show you maybe an easy way to think about it. But first of all, when I say 10 stitches behind the hook, I mean what we've just worked. So we're looking behind the hook and count back 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that means we end up with the previous mini wheel, and we're skipping that first little stitch and going into the second one there. So to slip stitch, you can do my breakaway style of slip stitch, just dipping the hook back and going through the stitch. Everything goes to the left of the hook, so the yarn in our work. And let's finish that slip stitch. And that's how things should look so far. Now, basically we do that again with another chain 3, make another mini wheel, chain 3, and just start the next mini wheel like we did before here. Floating single crochet and 1 single crochet into that floating ring, chain 3, and slip stitch 10 stitches behind the hook. Again, you'll recognize that it's really just go down to the previous mini wheel and go into that that second stitch. So I'll just pause here a second to give you an idea of what your work should look like so far. So basically this is what the whole row basically is going to look like, where we make a mini wheel and just start a mini wheel just above it, but 3 chains away either side. As I'm doing this video, this reminds me of sort of little gnomes, and the gnomes have their hats on, so I might even describe that for the rest of the video. A little gnome with his hat on. Okay, so let's continue. We need to repeat this area here, and now that means we have done the first 4 kind of mini wheels of the first square. So as we go on, instead of doing the chain 3 here, we're going on to the next square. And remember, we separate squares with 6 chains. So just continue after the 4th series there with chain 6. And repeat these little gnomes 4 more times. And I've finished off the 2nd square. And of course, to continue, chain 6 and repeat this 2 more times. And I'll go ahead and work that for you and show you a slightly different thing to do at the very end of the row. So here I've reached the last square. I've gotten to the last little gnome at the end. I've done the mini wheel, and to end this row, easy as just a chain 3. And now this is how things should look by the end of the setup row. Now to do a return row, we're going to head back in the other direction. We're basically going to finish off all the little gnomes' hats. And again, we're going to be connecting those up with either 6 chains or 3 chains. So begin this return row with another mini wheel. Close it by slip stitching around the chain 3. Let's continue with chain 3. And now let's head to the next little gnome's hat, because now we need to slip stitch into what I'm calling a vertical chain. So this chain 3 here is where we're headed. Just go kind of in that space and do a slip stitch around those chains. That makes a little kind of a chain square there. Okay, so that's what I mean by a vertical chain. Now let's continue on with the next mini wheel. Let's finish it by doing 6 more single crochets into its floating ring. As remember, we already have the first 2. And let's finish this mini wheel by slip stitching around the next vertical chain. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear from the pattern instructions. Here we are so far. And that pretty much sets up our sequence. Do 3 more chains. Head over to the next vertical chain, slip stitch around it, 6 single crochets in the next floating ring, slip stitch around the next vertical chain, and chain 3. That's how things should look, kind of like a sort of a railway track. Let's repeat that one more time for the last little hat in this set of 4. And now that we've finished the set of 4, instead of doing the chain 3, we see we've got 6 chains that connect. So let's do chain 6 here. And that's an easy way to kind of remember where you are without referring to the pattern all the time. So there's a chain 6, do chain 6, or chain 3, do chain 3. So again, we're just going to the next square and repeating all that again. Just continue that to the end of the row. And when you get to the last square, do the first 3 little mini wheels, and we're going to end slightly differently here. So on a return row, this always ends with chain 3. I'm making another little gnome's hat at the end. So that's a floating single crochet, chain 3, and slip stitch in that second stitch of the previous mini wheel. So that gives us a sideways little hat. So that's always going to be sticking out on the end of every row. And that's our return row complete. So let's start a foundation row. And with it, basically, all we're doing is putting on the little hats on all the mini wheels we've already made. So as for the setup row, we had to make the mini wheel and then put on the hat. Well, for this row, the mini wheels are already made. So we just need to put the hats on and connect this wheel to the next. So this part here is slightly different. Let's just go through that. Let's start off foundation row with chain 3, floating single crochet, single crochet, chain 3, and slip stitch into that wheel below, just like we've done before. And now as we move on to the next wheel, we do chain 3, and again we're slip stitching into the second stitch of the next mini wheel. So that's what that means. We should end up with another little square. So that's the only difference there. And once you do that, again you make your another little hat. And once you've done those first 3 little hats, of course it's time to move on to the next square. So that's just chain 6 and slip stitch into the second stitch of that next mini wheel, and so on. And at the end of the row, on the last square, just do the first 3 little hats. Just start the last one with the chain 3. So these last 2 rows pretty much set up what you will be doing for the rest of the shawl. This foundation row will happen pretty much all the time. The return row will be the same every time. And you're starting with the mini wheel, slip stitch, chain 3, finish the next hat with the chain 6, slip stitch, chain 3, and so on to the end of the row. So that's exactly the same. So what I'll do now is I'll work until this first set of squares, the first 4 of the row, are finished. And once the first set of 4 are finished, time to start another set of 4. And just like we've separated the squares within the row by 6 chains. We separate the rows again by 6 chains. And to get that to happen, we do a tall foundation row, which is basically the same as a foundation row, except instead of, when we make the little hats, instead of doing chain 3, we do chain 6. So that just means start a tall foundation row with 6 chains, floating single crochet, single crochet, chain 6, and again the pattern says go back 16 behind the hook, but again by now it's the same place you did before on the mini wheel that will be under the hat. Just go into the second chain with your slip stitch. So you can see how those 6 chains will separate this next row from the previous. Again, between hats it is still chain 3. And something else to keep in mind, we're doing tall hats, so to speak, on a tall foundation row, but the hats on the edge will always be chain 3. So if it's one that pokes out this way, it's going to be chain 3 all along. So hopefully this has shown you the points that were hard to explain in the written pattern. I don't intend to make this entire shawl for you right now. Rather, I just wanted to make sure I went over anything that might have been confusing. So at this point, I've pretty much shown you everything. Of course, the last step is to come along on the, once you get to the top, you need to finish off all of these hats on the left edge. Again, that's basically a return row. You already know how to do that. So I hope you have fun making this shawl. Please write in if you have any questions or other ideas that you would like to share with people. If you do make something, I would love to see it. Please share. Hopefully this will be the next go-to item in your wardrobe. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.